The bullet ricocheted off the iron water pump, missing Vivian Summers by mere inches as she crouched behind the splintered remains of a wooden barrel. The year was 1878, and the small town of Redemption Creek, Colorado, had become her prison rather than her salvation. Blood seeped through her fingers as she pressed against the wound on her arm, the result of an earlier, more accurate shot. The sun beat down mercilessly, dust swirling in the hot summer air as the shouts of angry men who believed she had stolen something precious echoed through the otherwise deserted street. "She's behind the general store," a gruff voice called out. "Don't let her escape this time." Vivian's breath came in ragged gasps. 3 days without proper food or water had left her weak, and the blood loss was making her lightheaded. She had to move, but her legs felt leaden, unwilling to carry her any further. The thundering of hooves made her heart stutter with renewed fear. "Find her? That thieving woman can't have gotten far." Tears stung her eyes as she tried once more to rise. This wasn't how her life was supposed to end, hunted down in a town she'd only arrived in a week ago, accused of a crime she didn't commit. But as the footsteps grew closer, Vivian began to accept her fate. Perhaps this was justice for all her other failings, for the mistakes that had driven her west in the first place. The shadow fell across her before she heard him approach. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the silent grace of a mountain lion. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his worn Stetson, but she could see the firm set of his jaw, the piercing blue eyes that assessed her condition in a single glance. "Please," she whispered, "I didn't take anything. They've got the wrong woman." The stranger didn't respond immediately. Instead, he crouched beside her, gently moving her hand to examine her wound. "Bullet just grazed you," he said, his voice low and rough like stone against leather. "But you've lost blood and you're exhausted." He glanced toward the sounds of approaching men. "Can you stand?" Vivian tried but stumbled forward into his arms. "Just leave me," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm not worth saving." The cowboy's eyes met hers, something flickering in their depths, determination, perhaps, or something deeper she couldn't name. His reply came without hesitation as he lifted her into his arms. "To me, you're worth the world." Before she could respond, he had carried her to his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that stood waiting at the edge of the alley. With strength that belied his lean frame, he lifted her onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. One strong arm wrapped around her waist, holding her securely against his chest as he spurred the horse forward. "Hold on," he murmured in her ear as they thundered out of town, leaving Vivian's pursuers shouting in their wake. The landscape blurred around them as they rode sagebrush and sandstone, giving way to scattered pine as they climbed higher into the foothills. Vivian's consciousness wavered, the rhythm of the horse's gallop and the steady heartbeat of the man behind her lulling her toward a darkness she couldn't fight. "Stay with me," the cowboy urged. His voice seemed to come from very far away. "We're almost there. Just stay awake a little longer." But the darkness was too inviting, promising an escape from the pain and fear. The last thing Vivian remembered was the tightening of his arm around her waist and the whispered promise that she would be safe. When Vivian awoke, the golden light of sunset was filtering through a window she didn't recognize. She lay on a bed covered with a patchwork quilt, her wounded arm cleaned and bandaged. For a moment, she thought she might have dreamed the entire ordeal: the chase, the shots fired, the mysterious cowboy, but the unfamiliar surroundings told her otherwise. She pushed herself up slowly, wincing at the pain that shot through her arm. The room was small but tidy, with simple furnishings. The bed, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, a chest of drawers, and a straight-backed chair where her torn and bloodied dress had been replaced with a clean, if somewhat large, man's shirt. The sound of a door opening drew her attention, and she tensed, ready to flee despite her weakness. But it was the cowboy who entered, carrying a steaming mug. Without his hat, she could see him properly for the first time: tawny hair that fell across his forehead, features that might have been carved from granite, and those eyes, blue as a mountain lake, that regarded her with cautious concern. "You're awake," he said, crossing to the bedside and offering her the mug. "Willow bark tea, it'll help with the pain and fever." Vivian accepted it warily. "Who are you?" "Name's Adam Daniels. This is my cabin." He gestured around the modest room. "You've been out for nearly a day." A day. Vivian tried to stand but swayed dangerously. Adam's hand shot out to steady her, guiding her back to the edge of the bed. "Those men in town won't find you here," he assured her. "My place isn't on any maps, and the few who know of it wouldn't tell anyone looking to cause trouble." Vivian sipped the bitter tea, studying him over the rim of the mug. "Why did you help me?" Adam moved to the window, looking out at the gathering dusk. "I was in town for supplies, heard the commotion, saw you running." He turned back to face her. "Doesn't take much to recognize when someone's being wrongly accused. Those men weren't lawmen, they were Harlan McGraw's hired guns." McGraw, the name was unfamiliar to Vivian. Owns half the county, including most of Redemption Creek, has his hands in everything from cattle to mining claims. "If his men were after you, you must have crossed him somehow." Vivian shook her head, wincing as the movement intensified her headache. "I arrived in town a week ago looking for work. Found a position as a seamstress at Mrs. Patterson's shop. Yesterday, a man accused me of stealing a gold pocket watch, said he'd left it with Mrs. Patterson for safekeeping and that I'd taken it." Her hands trembled around the mug. "I never saw any watch, but no one believed me. Mrs. Patterson herself said it must have been me, since I was the only one with access to her back room." Adam's expression hardened. "McGraw's known for running people out of town when they don't cooperate with his schemes. My guess is he wanted something from you, and when he didn't get it, he found a convenient way to discredit you." "But I never even met him," Vivian protested. "Doesn't mean he didn't notice you." Adam's gaze traveled over her face, lingering on her features in a way that made her flush despite her weakened state. "McGraw has a reputation for taking an interest in beautiful women who come to town." The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, caught Vivian off guard. She looked down, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance and the borrowed shirt that swallowed her slender frame. "I need to leave," she said, setting the mug aside. "I can't stay here. They'll be looking for me, and I've already put you at risk by being here." Adam crossed to her, taking the mug and placing it on the washstand. "You're in no condition to travel. The nearest town is 2 days' ride, and that's assuming you knew the way and had a horse." His voice softened. "Rest, recover your strength. We'll figure out what to do next once you're able to stand without falling over." Vivian wanted to protest, but the reality of her situation was undeniable. She had nowhere to go, no money, and barely enough strength to remain sitting upright. Whatever this man's motives for helping her, she had little choice but to accept his hospitality for now. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'll find a way to repay you." The corner of Adam's mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Just focus on getting better. There's stew warming on the stove. Think you can manage some food?" At the mention of food, Vivian's stomach growled audibly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten in days. She nodded, and Adam disappeared, returning moments later with a bowl of fragrant stew and a chunk of bread. "It's not fancy," he said, placing the tray across her lap, "but it'll put some strength back in you." Vivian took a spoonful, closing her eyes as the rich flavor filled her mouth. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely. Adam watched her eat for a moment before turning toward the door. "I'll be outside seeing to the horses. Call if you need anything." After he left, Vivian ate as much as her shrunken stomach could handle, then sank back against the pillows. Questions whirled through her mind. Who exactly was Adam Daniels? Why had he risked himself to save a stranger? And how long could she stay hidden in this mountain cabin before McGraw's men found her, or before her mysterious rescuer tired of her presence? But exhaustion soon overtook her curiosity, and she drifted back into sleep, the lingering taste of the stew on her lips, and the memory of strong arms carrying her to safety the last thoughts in her mind. The next few days passed in a haze of sleep and recovery for Vivian. Adam proved to be a surprisingly competent caretaker, changing her bandages with gentle hands and ensuring she ate regularly. He was quiet by nature, answering her questions with brief responses, but never volunteering much about himself. From their limited conversations, she learned he had been living alone in the mountains for nearly 5 years, supporting himself through hunting, trapping, and occasional work as a guide for prospectors. By the fourth day, Vivian was strong enough to leave the bed for extended periods. She insisted on helping with small tasks around the cabin, washing dishes, mending a tear in one of Adam's shirts, preparing simple meals from the supplies he had on hand. It was during one such evening, as they sat at his rough-hewn table sharing a meal of rabbit stew, that she finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been lingering in her mind. "Why did you really help me?" she asked, setting down her spoon. "And please don't say it was just because you knew I was innocent. Plenty of innocent people suffer injustice every day without strangers risking their lives to save them." Adam was silent for so long that Vivian thought he might not answer. He pushed his empty bowl aside, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the cabin's walls. "I recognized something in your eyes," he said finally, "something I've seen before in my own reflection." He met her gaze directly. The look of someone who's running not just from others, but from themselves. The accuracy of his assessment stunned Vivian into momentary silence. "You don't know anything about me," she said, but the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "I know you came west alone, which means you're either remarkably brave or remarkably desperate," Adam replied. "I know you took a job as a seamstress in a town controlled by one of the most dangerous men in the territory, which suggests you didn't have many options. And I know that when I found you, you were ready to be caught rather than fight anymore." He paused. "What I don't know is what you're running from." Vivian stood abruptly, gathering their bowls and taking them to the wash basin. The simple domestic action gave her a moment to collect herself, to decide how much to reveal to this man who had saved her life but remained largely a mystery. "My father died last winter," she said, keeping her back to him as she washed the dishes. "He left substantial debts that I couldn't pay. The creditors were insistent that arrangements be made." She scrubbed harder at a non-existent spot on one of the bowls. "There was a man, Edwin Blackstone, who offered to settle everything, in exchange for marriage, of course." "Of course," Adam echoed, his tone making it clear he understood exactly what kind of man would make such an offer. "He was 40 years older than me, with a reputation for cruelty toward his previous wives." Vivian set the clean bowls aside, drying her hands on her borrowed shirt. "I agreed to the engagement to buy time, then sold what little I had left and bought a ticket west. I've been moving from town to town, taking whatever work I could find, always afraid he might have sent someone after me." When she finally turned to face Adam, she was surprised to find him standing just behind her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "So you see," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm a woman who broke her word and ran from her obligations. Hardly worth the risk you took." Adam's hand rose slowly, hesitating for a moment before gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The unexpected tenderness of the gesture made her breath catch. "Running from a forced marriage to a cruel man isn't breaking your word, Vivian. It's survival." His fingers lingered near her face, not quite touching her skin. "And every life is worth saving, especially one as determined as yours." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Vivian couldn't or wouldn't name. Then Adam stepped back, breaking the spell. "You should rest," he said, his voice returning to its usual gruffness. "Your strength is coming back, but you're still healing." Vivian nodded, oddly disappointed by his withdrawal. "What about you? Where will you sleep?" Since her arrival, Adam had been sleeping on a bedroll near the fireplace, insisting she take the only bed in the small cabin. "Where I always do," he replied with a shrug. "The floor's fine for me." "It's your cabin," Vivian protested. "You shouldn't be displaced from your own bed." A ghost of a smile touched Adam's lips. "I've slept on harder ground than this floor, Miss Summers. Don't worry yourself about it." There was a finality to his tone that discouraged further argument. Vivian retreated to the bedroom. Changing into the clean nightshirt, Adam had provided her another of his own shirts, far too large but soft from many washings. As she settled under the quilt, she found herself listening to the quiet sounds of Adam moving about the main room, banking the fire, laying out his bedroll, the soft creak of the floorboards as he settled for the night. For all his reticence, there was something comforting about his presence just beyond the door. In the 5 years since her mother's death, followed by her father's decline and passing, Vivian had grown accustomed to being alone, to depending solely on herself. But these few days in Adam's cabin had reminded her of what it felt like to be cared for, to have someone concerned with her welfare. The thought was as terrifying as it was comforting. Attachments were dangerous for a woman in her position, a woman who might need to flee again at any moment. Yet as she drifted towards sleep, Vivian found herself wondering what it would be like to stay, to build something permanent in this remote mountain sanctuary with a man whose eyes held secrets as deep as her own. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the first hints of autumn coloring the aspen leaves that surrounded the cabin. Vivian woke to find Adam already gone, though a pot of coffee simmered on the stove and fresh biscuits sat wrapped in a cloth to stay warm. A note beside them, written in surprisingly elegant handwriting, informed her that he had gone to check his trapping lines and would return by midday. The solitude gave Vivian an opportunity she hadn't, yet had to fully explore the cabin that had become her temporary refuge. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Adam's few possessions were neatly arranged: a rifle and shotgun mounted above the door, a bookshelf containing a dozen well-worn volumes, a desk in the corner with papers and maps carefully stacked. It was the books that drew Vivian's attention. She ran her fingers along their spines, surprised by the titles Homer's Odyssey, Thoreau's Walden, collections of Shakespeare and Wordsworth, alongside more practical volumes on wilderness survival and natural medicine. Not the reading material she would have expected from a solitary mountain man. Curiosity piqued, she glanced toward the desk. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but something compelled her to look closer at the papers there. Most were indeed maps or notes on game trails and water sources, but beneath them she found a leather-bound journal. Against her better judgment, Vivian opened it. The pages contained not just the practical observations of a frontiersman, but eloquent descriptions of the mountains through the changing seasons, philosophical musings on solitude and belonging, and most surprisingly carefully rendered sketches of landscapes, animals, and plants. Adam Daniels, it seemed, was far more than the taciturn hunter he appeared to be. One entry in particular caught her eye, dated just a week earlier. Went to town for supplies today. Patterson's Mercantile had everything needed except the coffee had to settle for the inferior brand from the general store. Noticed a new face at the dressmaker's shop. A woman with eyes that have seen too much sorrow for her years. Found myself watching her longer than proper. Something in the careful way she moves, as though expecting the world to strike her down at any moment. Recognized that wariness. Perhaps that's why I cannot forget her face. Vivian closed the journal with trembling hands, realizing that Adam had noticed her in town days before their dramatic meeting. Had he been watching her all that time? The thought should have been unsettling, but instead, she felt an odd flutter in her chest. She returned the journal to its place and moved away from the desk, unsettled by her reaction. She had no business developing feelings for this man, regardless of how kind he had been or how intriguing she found him. Once she was fully recovered, she would need to move on, find another town far from McGraw's influence, rebuild her life once again. To distract herself, Vivian decided to make herself useful. Though her arm still pained her, she was strong enough to sweep the floor, wash the breakfast dishes, and even begin preparations for a midday meal. By the time she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching, she had a pot of beans simmering with the last of the rabbit meat, and had managed to bake a crude but edible cornbread using the supplies she found in Adam's stores. Adam entered the cabin with a brace of rabbits slung over his shoulder, stopping short when he saw her at the stove. For a moment, something flickered in his expression: surprise, certainly, but also a warmth that made Vivian's cheeks heat. "You shouldn't be exerting yourself," he said, setting the rabbits aside and removing his hat. "Your wound is healing well," Vivian finished for him. "And I'm not an invalid. I've been taking care of myself for a long time, Mr. Daniels. A scratch on my arm won't change that." The corner of Adam's mouth twitched. "So I see, and it's just Adam. Mr. Daniels makes me sound like my father. Then you must call me Vivian, not Miss Summers, she replied, turning back to the stove to hide her smile. I've made lunch, though I'm afraid I had to guess at the proportions for the cornbread. Your supplies are running low. Adam moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the coolness of the mountain air still clinging to his clothes. It smells wonderful, he said, his voice softening. It's been a long time since anyone cooked for me. Their eyes met, and for a moment Vivian forgot to breathe. Then Adam cleared his throat and stepped back. I'll need to go back to town soon, he said, moving to wash his hands in the basin. We're out of flour, salt, coffee, and a dozen other things, and I should find out if McGraw's men are still looking for you. I'll go with you, Vivian said immediately. Adam turned to her with a frown. That's not wise. If they're still searching, they'll be looking for a woman alone, she pointed out. Not a couple traveling together. I could wear different clothes, perhaps a hat to hide my hair. She hesitated before adding, besides, I need to move on soon. I can't stay here indefinitely, living off your charity. Something hardened in Adam's expression. Is that what you think this is? Charity? Vivian faltered under his intense gaze. I don't know what else to call it. You've given me food, shelter, care, and asked for nothing in return. Maybe I enjoy the company, Adam said quietly. 5 years is a long time to hear nothing but your own voice. The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than any of their previous conversations. Vivian found herself moving toward him, drawn by the vulnerability she sensed beneath his composed exterior. Even so, she said gently, I can't stay, you know that. McGraw sounds like the type of man who holds grudges, and I won't bring his wrath down on you. Adam's jaw tightened. I'm not afraid of Harlan McGraw. Perhaps you should be. Men like that, men with money and influence, they don't forget slights, and helping me escape was more than a slight. Vivian reached out, hesitating before lightly touching his arm. I'm grateful, truly. But the kindest thing I can do now is to leave, once we've been to town. Adam looked down at her hand on his arm, then up to her face. The intensity in his eyes made her want to step back or perhaps step closer. She wasn't sure which impulse was stronger. At least wait until your arm is fully healed, he said. Another week. Then if you still want to leave, I won't stop you. I'll even take you to the next town over Bristol's Crossing. It's far enough from McGraw's territory that you should be safe there. Vivian knew she should refuse. Every day she spent in Adam's company made the prospect of leaving more difficult. But the thought of traveling alone again, of facing the uncertainty and danger of the frontier without the protection his presence provided, was equally daunting. 1 week, she agreed finally. Then I'll go to Bristol's Crossing. Adam nodded once, seemingly satisfied with the compromise. We'll go to town tomorrow, early before most folks are about. You'll need proper clothes. I have some things that might work with alterations. Thank you, Vivian said, suddenly aware that her hand was still on his arm. She withdrew it quickly, turning back to the stove. We should eat before the food gets cold. They ate in companionable silence, the unspoken tension between them subsiding to a bearable hum. After the meal, Adam showed her the clothing he thought might be suitable for their trip to town, an old shirt small enough that it wouldn't completely swallow her frame, a vest that could be taken in at the sides, and a pair of trousers that would need significant alterations. I don't have much experience with women's clothing, he admitted as Vivian examined the garments, but I thought these might work for a disguise with your skills as a seamstress. They'll do nicely, Vivian assured him, already planning the adjustments needed. By tomorrow, I'll look the part of a young man, or at least from a distance. Adam's eyes traveled over her face, lingering on the delicate line of her jaw, the curve of her lips. I doubt anyone would mistake you for a man up close, he said, his voice rough. But from horseback, passing through town quickly, it might be enough to avoid notice. Vivian felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. I'll need a hat, she said, desperate to break the tension. Adam nodded, moving to a hook by the door where a second, slightly smaller hat hung. This should fit well enough, he said, handing it to her. It was my brother's. You have a brother? Vivian asked, surprised by this new information. A shadow crossed Adam's face. Had, he corrected. Samuel died at Antietam. He was just 19. I'm sorry, Vivian said softly, holding the hat with new reverence. Were you in the war as well? Adam nodded curtly. 3 years with the Union cavalry. That's where I learned to track to survive in rough country. His expression closed off, making it clear he didn't wish to discuss the subject further. You should rest this afternoon if you can. We'll leave before dawn tomorrow. With that, he took his rifle and left the cabin, presumably to hunt or perhaps simply to escape the memories their conversation had stirred. Vivian watched him go, understanding more now about the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes. The war had left scars on countless men, visible and invisible. That Adam had chosen this solitary existence in the mountains rather than returning to whatever life he'd had before made more sense now. She spent the rest of the afternoon altering the clothes, working carefully to make them appear as natural as possible while fitting her smaller frame. As she sewed, she found herself wondering what Adam had been like before the war, before the loss of his brother. Had he always been so reserved, so cautious with his words and emotions? Or had that been another casualty of the conflict that had torn the nation apart? By the time Adam returned at dusk, Vivian had completed the alterations and prepared a simple supper from the fresh game he'd brought earlier. They ate together, the conversation easier now, focused on practical matters related to their journey the next day. Adam explained the route they would take, a back trail that would bring them into Redemption Creek from the north, allowing them to reach the general store without passing through the main street where she'd been pursued. We'll go in separately, he said as they cleared away the supper dishes. I'll enter first, get what we need. You'll wait with the horses until I signal that it's safe. We'll be in and out in 15 minutes before most of the town is even awake. Vivian nodded, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach at the thought of returning to the place she'd nearly died. And if we're recognized, Adam's expression turned grim, then we ride hard and don't look back, but it won't come to that. I've been doing business in that town for 5 years without anyone knowing much about me. One more quick visit won't draw attention. His confidence was reassuring, but Vivian still spent a restless night, her dreams filled with images of pursuit and danger. When Adam woke her in the pre-dawn darkness, she was almost relieved to be facing the reality rather than her nightmares. She dressed quickly in the altered clothes, binding her chest with strips of cloth to further the disguise before pulling on the shirt and vest. Her hair, usually worn long down her back, she braided tightly and tucked up under Samuel's hat. When she emerged from the bedroom, Adam was waiting by the door, his expression unreadable as he took in her transformation. "Will it do?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious under his scrutiny. Adam nodded slowly. "From a distance, yes. Just keep your head down and let me do any talking that's needed." He handed her a worn leather coat. "It'll be cold riding before the sun's fully up." The coat enveloped her in warmth that carried Adam's scent, pine and wood smoke, and something uniquely him. Vivian pulled it closer around herself as they stepped out into the crisp mountain air. 2 horses waited, Adam's chestnut stallion and a smaller, dappled mare. "This is Penny," Adam said, helping Vivian mount despite her protests that she could manage. "She's gentle but sure-footed. She'll carry you safely." The journey down from the mountains took nearly 2 hours, the trail narrow and sometimes treacherous in the dim light of early morning. Adam rode ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure Vivian was managing. She was grateful for Penny's steady temperament as they navigated steep descents and crossed shallow streams still misted with dawn fog. As the sun began to crest the eastern ridges, they reached the outskirts of Redemption Creek. From their vantage point on a small rise, Vivian could see the town below a single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church steeple rising at the far end, scattered houses and businesses spreading out from the center. It looked peaceful in the golden morning light, giving no hint of the danger that had nearly claimed her life. Adam reined in his horse, turning to her. "Remember the plan. Stay with the horses behind the livery until I wave from the general store door. If anything seems wrong, if anyone approaches you, ride back up the trail. Don't wait for me." "I won't leave you," Vivian protested. Adam's expression softened. "I can take care of myself, have been for a long time. Your safety is what matters now." Before Vivian could argue further, he urged his horse forward, leading them down a narrow path that skirted the main approach to town. They entered Redemption Creek from a side street, passing behind the buildings rather than along the main thoroughfare. The town was quiet, with only a few early risers visible: a boy sweeping the boardwalk in front of the hotel, an old man opening the barber shop, a woman hanging laundry behind one of the houses. Adam guided them to the rear of the livery stable, helping Vivian dismount in the shadows of the building. "Wait here," he murmured, his hand lingering on her arm. "I won't be long." Vivian nodded, her throat suddenly tight with anxiety. She watched as Adam strode confidently around the corner of the building, disappearing from view as he headed toward the general store. Left alone with the horses, she strained to hear any sign of trouble, her heart pounding so loudly in her ears that she feared she might miss a warning shout or gunshot. The minutes stretched endlessly. Penny nudged her shoulder gently, as if sensing her tension. Vivian stroked the mare's nose absently, her eyes fixed on the corner where Adam had vanished. A floorboard creaked behind her. Vivian whirled around, her hand automatically reaching for the knife Adam had insisted she carry in her belt. She found herself face to face with a man she recognized from her terrifying flight through town, one of McGraw's men, a heavy-set brute with a jagged scar running from his eye to his jaw. Well, he drawled, his hand already resting on the pistol at his hip. "Thought you looked familiar, even in those men's clothes. McGraw's offering a nice reward for information about a certain lady who disappeared last week. Seems I just found her." Vivian backed away, her grip tightening on the knife still concealed beneath her coat. "You're mistaken," she said, trying to deepen her voice. "I'm just holding the horses for my brother." The man's laughter held no humor. "Nice try, miss, but I never forget a face, especially one as pretty as yours." He took a step closer. "Now you can come along quietly or things can get unpleasant. Your choice." Vivian's mind raced. She couldn't call for Adam without alerting others to their presence. She couldn't outrun this man, and even if she mounted Penny, he could easily raise the alarm before she escaped the town. "What does McGraw want with me?" she asked, buying time as she assessed her options. "I didn't steal anything." "Don't matter to me what you did or didn't do," the man said with a shrug. "McGraw pays, I deliver, simple as that." His eyes narrowed. "Though I imagine he's more interested now in the man who helped you escape." Dangerous thing, crossing Harlan McGraw. Vivian felt a surge of protective fury at the implied threat to Adam. Without conscious decision, she drew the knife, holding it before her with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "I'm not going anywhere with you," she declared, abandoning all pretense of disguise, "and neither is the man who helped me." The thug's eyes widened momentarily at her defiance before his face settled into an ugly smile. "Got some spirit, don't you? McGraw will enjoy breaking that." He reached for his gun. "Drop the knife, girl. You don't want to make this worse than it has to be." Vivian tensed, knowing she stood little chance against a gun but unwilling to surrender. As the man began to draw his weapon, a voice like cold steel cut through the morning air. "Touch that gun and it'll be the last mistake you ever make." Adam stood at the corner of the livery, his rifle aimed steadily at the thug's chest. His expression was deadly calm, but Vivian could see the rage burning in his eyes. "Daniels," the man said, recognition and wariness crossing his face as his hand froze near his holster. "This ain't your concern." "The lady is under my protection," Adam replied evenly. "That makes it very much my concern. Now you have two choices: walk away and forget you saw either of us, or see if you can draw before my bullet finds your heart." He cocked the rifle with deliberate slowness. "I wouldn't bet on the second option if I were you." For a tense moment, Vivian thought the man would risk it. His eyes darted between Adam's rifle and her knife, calculating his odds. Then, with a muttered curse, he raised his hands slightly. "McGraw won't forget this," he warned. "He's got a long memory for those who cross him." "So do I," Adam replied coldly. "Now back away, slowly." The thug complied, moving backward until he reached the corner of the building. "This ain't over," he said, then turned and disappeared around the side of the livery. Adam was at Vivian's side in an instant, his free hand gripping her arm as his eyes scanned her for injury. Are you hurt? She shook her head, her fingers still clutched around the knife. No, he recognized me despite the disguise. We need to leave, now. Adam helped her mount Penny with urgent efficiency. He'll be back with others. They rode out of town at a controlled pace, not wanting to draw attention with a headlong gallop but moving as quickly as they dared. Only when they reached the cover of the foothills did Adam allow them to stop briefly, listening for sounds of pursuit. I think we're clear, he said after a moment, though his posture remained tense. But we can't return to the cabin. It's the first place they'll look once they start asking questions in town. Where will we go? Vivian asked, the reality of their situation settling over her like a cold fog. Not only was she still being hunted, but now Adam was in danger as well because of her. I have a line shack about 15 miles east of here, Adam replied. It's remote, used only during hunting season. We can stay there while we decide our next move. The implications of his words weren't lost on Vivian. Our next move. Adam, this is my problem. You've already risked too much. I won't let you become a fugitive because of me. Adam's expression softened as he looked at her, something in his eyes making her heart skip. I became involved the moment I carried you away from those men in town. I don't regret it, and I won't abandon you now. He reached across the space between their horses to touch her cheek lightly. We're in this together, Vivian, whether you like it or not. The simple declaration, delivered with such quiet certainty, left Vivian speechless. No one in her life had ever stood by her this way, not her father, certainly not Edwin Blackstone, not even the friends she'd left behind in the East. Yet this man, who had known her barely a week, was willing to risk everything for her safety. Thank you, she whispered, leaning into his touch before she could stop herself. But I'm not worth. Don't, Adam interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. Don't say you're not worth it, not again. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. Every life has value, Vivian, yours more than most. He withdrew his hand and turned his horse toward the east. Come on. We should reach the line shack before nightfall if we keep a steady pace. They rode in silence for the next several hours, following game trails and narrow paths that wound through increasingly dense forest. The terrain was different from the area around Adam's cabin, less rocky, with thicker stands of pine and occasional clearings filled with wildflowers. Despite the circumstances, Vivian found herself appreciating the wild beauty of the landscape. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing where a crude but sturdy log structure stood nestled against a rocky outcropping. The line shack was more primitive than Adam's cabin, a single room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table and chairs, and 2 narrow bunks built into the wall. A lean-to attached to one side provided shelter for the horses. It's not much, Adam said as he helped Vivian dismount, but it's weather-tight and hidden. We should be safe here while we plan. Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed Vivian, the tension of their escape and the long ride catching up with her all at once. She swayed on her feet, and Adam's arm went around her waist, supporting her. Let's get you inside, he murmured, his concern evident in the crease between his brows. You need rest. The interior of the shack was dusty but clean otherwise, with a stack of firewood beside the hearth and basic supplies: beans, coffee, jerky stored in a chest beneath one of the bunks. Adam settled Vivian on the lower bunk before building a fire to ward off the evening chill. I didn't get much at the general store before I spotted trouble, he said as he worked, but there's enough food here to last a few days. Game is plentiful in these woods, so we won't go hungry. Vivian watched him through half-closed eyes, the rhythmic movements of his hands as he built the fire oddly mesmerizing. What happens now? She asked softly. McGraw's men will be searching for both of us. Adam sat back on his heels as the fire caught, casting flickering shadows across his face. Now we rest. Tomorrow we'll decide whether to head for Bristol's Crossing as planned or find another solution. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Things are complicated now. McGraw doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily. No, Vivian agreed, guilt weighing heavy on her heart. He isn't. Which is why you should take me to Bristol's Crossing and then go your own way, perhaps back to your cabin once the search dies down. Adam moved to sit beside her on the edge of the bunk. Is that what you want? To part ways once we reach Bristol's Crossing. The question hung in the air between them, laden with meanings Vivian wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. She looked down at her hands, still grimy from the day's travel. "What I want and what's best are rarely the same thing," she said finally. "You've already done more for me than anyone had a right to expect. I won't be responsible for you losing the life you've built here." "And if I said I was willing to risk that?" Adam's voice was low, almost a whisper. "If I said that meeting you has made me question whether the life I've been living is really living at all?" Vivian looked up, startled by the raw honesty in his words. Adam's eyes met hers, and she saw in them a vulnerability that matched her own, the loneliness, the wariness, but also a spark of something that might have been hope. "I've been running for so long," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "From Edwin, from my past, from allowing myself to need anyone. I don't know if I can stop, even if I wanted to." Adam's hand found hers, his calloused fingers entwining with her smaller ones. "Maybe you don't have to run alone anymore." The simple statement undid something in Vivian's chest, a knot of fear and loneliness that had been tightening for years. Tears welled in her eyes, and she tried to blink them away, embarrassed by this show of weakness. Adam reached up with his free hand, gently brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "It's been a long day," he said softly. "You should rest. Things often look clearer in the morning light." He made to stand, but Vivian held onto his hand. "Adam," she said, his name feeling right on her lips, "thank you. Not just for saving my life, but for seeing value in it when I couldn't." Something flickered in Adam's eyes, a warmth that made Vivian's pulse quicken. For a moment she thought he might lean closer, might bridge the small space between them. Instead, he squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "Get some sleep," he said, his voice rougher than before. "I'll keep watch for a while." As Vivian lay back on the narrow bunk, she realized with startling clarity that somewhere in the past week, this quiet, complicated man had become more than just her rescuer. He had become someone she cared for deeply, perhaps even loved. The thought should have terrified her, but instead it settled in her heart like a long, absent piece finally clicking into place. Dawn arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the soft rustling of pine needles in the morning breeze. Vivian woke to find the shack empty, Adam's bedroll neatly arranged on the opposite bunk. For a moment, panic seized her had he left during the night. But then she heard the sound of chopping wood outside and relief washed through her. She rose, grimacing at the state of her clothes, still the disguise from yesterday, now wrinkled and dust-covered. Using water from the barrel outside, she washed her face and hands, then attempted to bring some order to her hair. As she worked, she considered their situation with the clarity Adam had promised the night would bring. They couldn't stay at the line shack indefinitely. Sooner or later, McGraw's men would widen their search, especially if the thug from town had recognized Adam. Bristol's Crossing remained their best option, far enough from Redemption Creek to be relatively safe, yet close enough to reach within a day's journey. But what then? Would they part ways, as reason dictated they should? Or would Adam's suggestion of continuing together prove more than just words spoken in a moment of connection? The door opened, interrupting her thoughts as Adam entered with an armful of freshly split wood. He paused when he saw her standing there, his expression softening. "Morning," he said, moving to stack the wood beside the fireplace. "How's the arm?" Vivian glanced down at her wound, almost forgotten in the midst of yesterday's events. "Healing well, barely painful now," Adam nodded, straightening up and dusting off his hands. "Good. I caught fish for breakfast. They're cooking outside." The simple domesticity of the moment, Adam providing food, Vivian making herself presentable in their temporary home, struck her with unexpected force. It felt right in a way few things had in her life. "I've been thinking," she said as they sat outside on a fallen log, sharing the trout Adam had caught and cooked over an open fire. "About Bristol's Crossing." Adam glanced at her, his face carefully neutral. "And it makes sense as our destination," Vivian continued, choosing her words deliberately. "It's far enough from McGraw's influence to be safe, at least for a while." "For a while," Adam repeated, his attention seemingly fixed on the fish he was eating. "And then?" Vivian took a deep breath, gathering her courage. And then we decide, together, if that's still what you want. Adam set down his plate, turning to face her fully. Is it what you want, Vivian? The directness of the question made her heart race, but she met his gaze steadily. Yes, she said simply. It is. Something in Adam's expression shifted the guardedness, falling away to reveal a warmth and hope that took Vivian's breath away. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. Then that's what we'll do, he said, his voice rough with emotion. We'll go to Bristol's crossing, together. The moment was broken by the distant sound of voices, men calling to one another through the trees. Adam was on his feet instantly, his expression alert as he listened. McGraw's men, he said grimly. They've found the trail faster than I expected. He pulled Vivian to her feet. We need to leave, now, no time to pack. They moved with urgent efficiency, grabbing only the essentials: Adam's rifle, a canteen of water, what little food could be quickly stuffed into saddlebags. Within minutes, they were mounted and moving away from the line shack, heading deeper into the forest rather than toward the main trail. Where are we going? Vivian asked in a hushed voice as they picked their way through the dense underbrush. This isn't the way to Bristol's crossing. They'll be watching the direct routes, Adam explained, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead. We'll circle around, approach from the north. It adds a day to our journey, but it's safer. The voices behind them grew fainter as they pushed on, following game trails that wound through increasingly rugged country. By midday, they had climbed to higher elevation, the forest giving way to rocky slopes dotted with scrub pine and juniper. Adam called a brief halt to rest the horses and check their bearings. We should be well away from them now, he said, offering Vivian the canteen, but we'll keep moving until nightfall just to be sure. Vivian took a long drink, then handed it back to him. How did they find the line shack so quickly? You said it was remote, unknown. Adam's expression darkened. Someone must have talked. There aren't many who knew about that place, but it only takes one. He shook his head. McGraw has ways of loosening tongues, money for some, threats for others. He seems to have a personal vendetta now, Vivian observed. First against me for some reason I still don't understand, and now against you for helping me. Men like McGraw can't abide being defied, Adam said. Each time someone stands against them, it threatens their power. And power is all they truly care about. He met her gaze. But they aren't invincible, no matter what they want people to believe. There was something in his tone, a certainty born of experience, that made Vivian wonder again about Adam's past. Before she could ask, however, he was back on his feet, helping her remount. They traveled through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they descended into a broad valley cut by a swift flowing river. Adam led them to a sheltered spot beneath an overhanging rock face, protected from view by a stand of cottonwoods. We'll camp here tonight, he said, dismounting and helping Vivian down. The river will mask our sounds and the trees provide cover. By tomorrow evening, we should reach the northern approach to Bristol's crossing. As darkness fell, they built a small, nearly smokeless fire, careful to keep it shielded from distant view. They ate a simple meal of jerky and the last of the biscuits Adam had packed, sitting close together for warmth as the night air grew chill. Tell me about Bristol's crossing, Vivian said as they watched the flames dance. What kind of place is it? Adam stretched his legs out before him, his shoulder brushing against hers. It's a decent town, smaller than Redemption Creek but growing, has a school, a church, several businesses. The sheriff there, Jackson Wallace, is a good man, honest, doesn't take bribes or look the other way like some. You know him well, Adam nodded. We served together in the war, different regiments, but we ended up in the same field hospital after Gettysburg, formed a friendship of sorts. He poked at the fire with a stick. He's offered me a deputy position more than once. You never considered it. Vivian asked, surprised. Adam was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the flames. After the war, I couldn't stand to be around people much. Too many crowds, too much noise. The mountains offered peace, solitude. He glanced at her. It was what I needed then, but needs change. The simple statement held volumes of meaning. Vivian found herself leaning slightly against him, drawn to his solid presence and the unexpected openness he was showing. What about you? Adam asked. What will you look for in Bristol's crossing? Vivian considered the question. A fresh start, I suppose. Work, certainly I'm a decent seamstress and growing towns always need those skills. She hesitated before adding, and perhaps for the first time a chance to build something that's mine, something permanent. Adam's arm slipped around her shoulders, the gesture so natural it felt as though they had sat this way 100 times before. That sounds like a good dream, he said softly. Vivian turned her face toward his, suddenly aware of how close they were. In the flickering firelight, Adam's eyes held a warmth that had nothing to do with the flames. Is it just a dream? She whispered. Adam's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. Not if you don't want it to be, he murmured. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, a question rather than a demand. Vivian answered without hesitation, her hands rising to rest against his chest as she leaned into him. Adam's arms tightened around her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more honest than words could have expressed. When they finally parted, Vivian remained in the circle of his arms, her head resting against his shoulder as they watched the fire burn down to embers. No more words were needed that night, the path ahead suddenly clearer than it had ever been. Morning arrived with a clarity that matched Vivian's spirits. They broke camp early, eager to reach Bristol's crossing before nightfall. The journey was arduous, taking them across rocky terrain and through dense forest, but they rode together with a new ease, a sense of shared purpose that made the miles pass swiftly. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a final rise and saw Bristol's crossing spread out in the valley below, a neat arrangement of buildings along a main street, with houses and farms scattered around the perimeter. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from this distance, they could see people moving about their evening business. Adam reined in his horse, and Vivian stopped beside him. For a moment, they simply gazed down at the town that represented so much hope for their future. It looks peaceful, Vivian observed. Adam nodded. It is mostly. Jackson runs a tight ship. He glanced at her, a question in his eyes. Ready? Vivian reached across the space between them to take his hand. Ready. They rode down into the valley as the first lamps were being lit in the windows of the town. The main street was quiet but not deserted, with a few people still completing errands before supper. Curious glances were cast their way. Newcomers always attracted attention in small frontier towns, but there was no hostility in the looks, just natural interest. Adam led them directly to a modest building with a sign reading Sheriff's Office hanging above the door. He dismounted, then helped Vivian down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Let me do the talking at first, he murmured. Jackson can be a bit gruff with strangers, but he's fair. The office was warm and well lit, with a pot-bellied stove in one corner and wanted posters tacked neatly to the walls. Behind a desk sat a man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered and solid, with a neatly trimmed beard shot through with gray. He looked up as they entered, surprise and then recognition crossing his face as he saw Adam. Daniels, he said, rising to his feet with a genuine smile. Been a while, thought you'd taken permanent root up in those mountains of yours. Jackson. Adam stepped forward to shake the sheriff's hand. Good to see you. Things change. Sheriff Wallace's gaze shifted to Vivian, curiosity evident in his expression. Adam placed a protective hand at the small of her back, guiding her forward. This is Miss Vivian Summers, he said. Vivian, Sheriff Jackson Wallace. The sheriff tipped his hat politely. Madam, welcome to Bristol's crossing. Thank you, Sheriff, Vivian replied, relief washing through her at the normalcy of the interaction after days of fear and flight. We need to talk, Jackson, Adam said, his tone more serious. Privately. The sheriff raised an eyebrow but nodded. Of course. Come on through to the back. Mrs. Patterson just brought over some fresh coffee and apple pie. He led them through a door into a small but comfortable back room that served as both kitchen and living quarters. A pot of coffee indeed sat warming on the stove, and a pie rested on the table, its crust still golden and flaky. Once they were seated with coffee and generous slices of pie before them, Adam explained their situation: Vivian's false accusation in Redemption Creek, McGraw's pursuit, their narrow escape. He was careful with the details, Vivian noticed, sharing only what was necessary for the sheriff to understand the danger they faced. Wallace listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer as the tale unfolded. When Adam finished, he sat back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Harlan McGraw," he said finally. "I've had dealings with him before, never pleasant." He looked at Vivian. "I'm sorry for what you've endured, Miss Summers. False accusations are a coward's weapon." "Then you believe us?" Vivian asked, hardly daring to hope it could be this simple. The sheriff nodded. "Adam Daniels isn't a man given to exaggeration or lies. If he says you're innocent, that's good enough for me." He turned to Adam. "But McGraw isn't likely to give up easily, especially now that you're involved. He'll have men watching the roads, asking questions in every town within 50 miles. "I know," Adam agreed. "That's why we came to you first. Vivian needs a safe place to stay while we figure out our next steps." Wallace considered this. The widow Carson takes in boarders respectable place, good food, fair prices. She has a room available, last I heard. He glanced between them, a question in his eyes that he was too polite to voice aloud. Adam answered it anyway. "2 rooms if she has them," he said, his hand finding Vivian's under the table. For now, the sheriff's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "I see." He rose from the table. "Let me send my deputy to inquire about those rooms. In the meantime, you're welcome to stay here. The cells are empty tonight, thankfully, and I've got a cot in the storeroom." After Wallace left to make arrangements, Vivian turned to Adam, overwhelmed by the sheriff's easy acceptance and assistance. "Is it always this simple with friends?" she asked, half joking but with genuine wonder beneath the words. Adam's expression softened as he looked at her. "No," he said quietly, "but Jackson's a good judge of character. He can see what I see in you." "And what's that?" Vivian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adam's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Strength, courage, a heart that's been broken but refuses to stay that way." His eyes held hers. "Beauty inside and out." Vivian felt a blush rise to her cheeks, still unaccustomed to hearing such words directed at her. Before she could respond, the door opened and Sheriff Wallace returned. "Good news," he announced. "Mrs. Carson has 2 rooms available and is happy to have you both. Her place is just down the street, respectable neighborhood, close enough to my office should any trouble arise." He handed Adam a set of keys. "I've taken the liberty of arranging for your horses to be stabled at the livery. Jed will take good care of them." Adam rose, pulling Vivian gently to her feet beside him. "Thank you, Jackson. We're in your debt." The sheriff waved away the gratitude. "Consider it partial repayment for that time outside Richmond." At Vivian's questioning look, he added, "Your friend here pulled me out of a rather tight spot during the war, saved my life and several others. Some debts can never be fully repaid." Adam looked uncomfortable with the praise. "That was a long time ago." "Not so long I've forgotten," Wallace replied firmly. "Now let me walk you to Mrs. Carson's. It's fully dark now, and while Bristol's Crossing is generally peaceful, I prefer not to take chances with newcomers." Mrs. Carson proved to be a plump, cheerful widow in her 50s who welcomed them warmly, asked no uncomfortable questions, and showed them to adjoining rooms on the 2nd floor of her neat frame house. The rooms were small but immaculately clean, with fresh linens on the beds and curtains at the windows. "Breakfast is at 7, she informed them as she prepared to leave them to settle in. "Nothing fancy, but hearty flapjacks, eggs, bacon when I can get it. I do laundry on Mondays and Thursdays if you've got things needing washing." Her kind eyes lingered on Vivian's travel-worn appearance. "And I might have a dress or 2 that could be altered to fit you, miss, if you're in need. My daughter left some things when she married and moved to Denver." Vivian was touched by the offer. "That's very kind, Mrs. Carson. I would appreciate it greatly." After the widow departed, Vivian and Adam stood in the hallway between their rooms, suddenly awkward in this new, more civilized setting. The intimacy they had shared by the campfire seemed distant now, constrained by the walls and conventions of town life. "You should rest," Adam said finally, his voice low. "It's been a long journey," Vivian nodded, though fatigue was far from the foremost emotion she was feeling. "Yes, I suppose I should." She hesitated, then added, "What happens tomorrow?" Adam's expression softened. Tomorrow, we begin building that life you talked about. I'll speak with Jackson about work for both of us, if you wish. Mrs. Patterson at the dress shop always complains of being overworked. And McGraw, Vivian couldn't help asking. His men, Adam's jaw set in a determined line. Let me worry about McGraw. Jackson has jurisdiction here, not McGraw's hired guns. You're safe in Bristol's crossing. His hand rose to cup her cheek briefly. I promise. The simple vow carried weight, as did everything Adam said. Vivian leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty. Good night, Adam, she whispered. Good night, Vivian, he replied, his thumb brushing her cheekbone once before he stepped back. Sleep well. In her room, Vivian sat on the edge of the bed, emotions swirling through her like leaves in an autumn wind. Fear was still there, the habit of looking over her shoulder too deeply ingrained to vanish overnight. But alongside it was something else, something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Hope for safety, for belonging, for a future that held more than just survival. And beneath it all, like a foundation stone, was her growing feeling for Adam Daniels, the quiet, steady man who had risked everything to save a woman he barely knew. A man who looked at her and saw not a burden or a prize, but a person of value. A man who, against all odds, seemed to be falling in love with her as surely as she was with him. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as Vivian prepared for bed in the small, clean room that represented the first step toward her new life, she found herself smiling. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Vivian and Adam settled into life in Bristol's crossing. True to Adam's prediction, Mrs. Patterson at the dress shop was delighted to hire Vivian when she saw samples of her needlework. Adam, meanwhile, after long conversations with Sheriff Wallace, accepted the deputy position that had been offered to him so many times before. They fell into an easy routine breakfast at Mrs. Carson's, then their separate work during the day, followed by supper together in the small restaurant next to the hotel. In the evenings, they often walked through town, Adam pointing out places of interest and introducing Vivian to townspeople he knew from his occasional visits over the years. Through it all, their relationship deepened and evolved. The connection that had begun in crisis blossomed in peace, revealing shared interests and complementary temperaments. Adam's quiet strength balanced Vivian's more expressive nature. Her warmth drew him out of the isolation he had maintained for so long. It was during one such evening walk, a week after their arrival, that Adam brought up the subject they had both been carefully avoiding. Jackson received word from a contact in Redemption Creek today, he said as they strolled along the river that gave the town its name. McGraw's men have been asking questions, showing your description to people in towns all along the main routes. Vivian's hand tightened in his. Have they looked here yet? Adam shook his head. Not yet, but it's likely only a matter of time. He guided her to a bench overlooking the water. Jackson has a proposal one I think has merit. As they sat, Vivian studied his face in the fading light. What kind of proposal? McGraw's power comes from fear and manipulation, Adam explained. He's never faced real consequences for his actions because no one dares to stand against him. He took both her hands in his. But if enough people did, if we gathered evidence of his corruption, his threats, his use of hired guns to intimidate innocent people, the territorial governor might be persuaded to investigate. Vivian frowned. Evidence from whom? People are too afraid to speak out. From us, Adam said simply. Your false accusation, my encounter with his men, and from others Jackson knows who have suffered similar treatment. Together, it might be enough to at least limit McGraw's power, if not end it entirely. It would be dangerous, Vivian said, though she felt a spark of hope at the possibility of truly being free of McGraw's shadow. Adam nodded. Yes, but living in fear, always looking over our shoulders, that's no kind of life, Vivian, not the one I want for us. The casual us sent a thrill through Vivian's heart, but she focused on the practical aspects of the proposal. How would it work? Would we have to return to Redemption Creek? No, Adam assured her quickly. Jackson would gather statements here, then take them to the territorial capital himself. His word carries weight with the authorities. He squeezed her hands gently. It's your decision, Vivian. If you'd rather wait, see if McGraw loses interest. He won't, Vivian said with sudden certainty. Men like that, men who see people as possessions to be controlled, they don't simply give up what they believe is theirs. She straightened her shoulders. I'll give my statement, whatever it takes to be truly free. Adam's expression filled with pride and something deeper, something that made Vivian's breath catch. You're the bravest woman I've ever known, he said softly. Not brave, Vivian corrected him. Just tired of running. And she added, her voice dropping to a whisper, I have something worth fighting for now. Adam's eyes darkened as he understood her meaning. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward until his lips met hers. Unlike their first kiss by the campfire tentative, questioning this one held certainty, promise, and a depth of feeling that left Vivian breathless. When they finally parted, the sun had set completely, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above. Adam kept his arm around Vivian as they rose to walk back to Mrs. Carson's boarding house, their steps matched in perfect rhythm. There's something else I've been meaning to ask you, Adam said as they approached the house. Something I've been considering since we arrived here. Vivian looked up at him, curious about the slight nervousness she detected in his voice. What is it? Adam stopped at the foot of the steps leading to the porch, turning to face her directly. Jackson mentioned a small house for sale on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, stable for a couple of horses. Needs some work, but the bones are good. He took a deep breath. I've been thinking of buying it. Oh, Vivian said, unsure why he seemed so hesitant about this news. That sounds wonderful, Adam. You'd be more comfortable than at Mrs. Carson's, I'm sure. Adam's smile held a hint of amusement. I wasn't thinking of living there alone, Vivian. For a moment, Vivian didn't understand, then realization dawned and her heart began to race. You mean? I mean, Adam said, taking her hands in his, that I love you, Vivian Summers. I think I began falling in love with you the moment I saw you in that alley, wounded but still fighting. Every day since has only deepened that feeling. His thumbs traced circles on her palms. I know it's fast. I know we've known each other only a short time, but sometimes when something is right, you just know. Vivian could scarcely breathe, joy rising in her chest like a tide. Are you asking me to marry you, Adam Daniels? I am, he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. Not right away if you need time, but yes, I'm asking you to be my wife, to build that permanent thing you talked about together. Tears welled in Vivian's eyes, but they were tears of happiness rather than sorrow. For so long she had believed herself unworthy of love, undeserving of happiness. She had run from connection, from vulnerability, from the very possibility of a future shared with someone else. But this man, this quiet, honorable, gentle man had shown her another way. Had shown her that she was worth saving, worth protecting, worth loving. That the walls she had built around her heart could be breached by patience and kindness. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking on the simple word. Yes, I'll marry you. Adam's face transformed with joy, years seeming to fall away as he swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of exuberance. Vivian laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he spun her once before setting her gently back on the ground. I love you, she said, the words feeling both new and familiar on her lips. I love you, Adam Daniels. Their kiss sealed the promise, witnessed only by the stars above and Mrs. Carson, who watched discreetly from her parlor window with a knowing smile before turning away to give the young couple their privacy. The following weeks were filled with purpose as they worked toward their intertwined goals, gathering evidence against McGraw while preparing for their life together. Sheriff Wallace collected statements not only from Vivian and Adam, but from several others who had suffered at McGraw's hands and were now willing to speak out, protected by distance and the sheriff's authority. Meanwhile, Adam purchased the small house he had described, and he and Vivian spent every spare moment making it habitable. The work was hard but satisfying, repairing the roof, replacing broken window panes, painting walls, planting a small vegetable garden that would bear fruit the following spring. Mrs. Carson and the other women of Bristol's Crossing, charmed by the romance of it all, helped Vivian prepare for a modest wedding. Mrs. Patterson allowed her time to sew her own wedding dress, a simple gown of ivory cotton with lace trim salvaged from one of Mrs. Carson's daughter's old dresses. The women organized a quilting bee, creating a wedding quilt from donated scraps of fabric, each piece representing a wish for the couple's happiness. 2 months after their arrival in Bristol's Crossing, Sheriff Wallace departed for the territorial capital with his collection of statements and evidence. The town held its collective breath, waiting for news of whether the governor would act against the powerful McGraw. It was during this time of waiting that Adam and Vivian were married on a clear October morning, the aspen trees surrounding the town blazing gold against the blue sky. The ceremony was held in the small church, attended by what seemed like the entire population of Bristol's Crossing people who had, in the short time Vivian had lived among them, become friends and neighbors. Sheriff Wallace, having returned just the day before, stood as Adam's best man. Mrs. Carson dabbed at her eyes as she watched from the front pew, pleased as any mother would be to see two people she had grown to care for joined in marriage. As Vivian spoke her vows, her eyes never leaving Adam's, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a terrified woman running from her past to a bride embracing her future, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet it had happened one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. The reception was held in the town square, tables laden with food contributed by every household. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass, Sheriff Wallace called for attention, raising his glass in a toast to the newlyweds. "To Adam and Vivian," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "may your lives together be as strong and true as the love that brought you to us." He paused, a smile spreading across his usually serious face. "And I have one more reason to celebrate today. Word came just yesterday from the territorial governor. Based on our evidence, he's ordered a full investigation into Harlan McGraw's activities in Redemption Creek and surrounding areas." A cheer went up from the crowd, loudest from those who had contributed their own stories to the case against McGraw. "It'll be a long process," Wallace continued once the noise died down, "but McGraw's days of ruling through fear are numbered. Justice may be slow, but it does come eventually to those who deserve it." Vivian, seated beside Adam at the head table, felt his hand tighten around hers. She turned to find him watching her, his blue eyes warm with love and pride. "Thank you," she said softly, for his ears alone. Adam's brow furrowed slightly. "For what?" "For saving me that day in Redemption Creek, for believing I was worth saving when I didn't believe it myself." Adam leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear as he replied, "You saved yourself, Vivian. You survived, you endured, you kept going when it would have been easier to give up." He pulled back slightly to meet her eyes. "I just had the good fortune to be there when you needed a hand to hold." Vivian smiled, knowing there was truth in his words, but also knowing that without Adam, she might never have found the courage to stop running, to face her fears, to believe in the possibility of happiness. "Well then," she said, lifting her glass to touch it gently against his, "to good fortune and to hands that hold on tight." "To us," Adam agreed, his smile holding all the promise of their future together, "and to the life we're building." As the celebration continued around them, Vivian leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in a way she had never thought possible. The path ahead might not always be smooth. McGraw's influence would not disappear overnight, and life on the frontier would always hold challenges, but for the first time, Vivian faced the future without fear. She was no longer running. She was home. Epilogue: 5 years later, the spring morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the lace curtains Vivian had made for the bedroom window. She stirred, reaching instinctively for Adam beside her, but found his side of the bed empty. Sitting up, she listened to the familiar sounds of their home, the crackle of the cookstove being lit, the soft murmur of Adam's voice, followed by a child's delighted giggle. Vivian smiled, swinging her legs over the side of the bed and reaching for her robe. 5 years of marriage had brought changes to their lives. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family. Adam's promotion to sheriff after Jackson Wallace moved on to become a marshal. Vivian's thriving dressmaking business operated from a small shop Adam had built adjacent to their home. But the greatest change of all came charging through the bedroom door at that moment, a sturdy boy of 4 with Adam's blue eyes and Vivian's dark hair, followed more sedately by his father carrying a tray. "Mama," the boy exclaimed, launching himself onto the bed. "Papa and I made breakfast for you. It's a surprise." Vivian caught her son in a hug, pressing a kiss to his tousled hair. "Is it, Samuel? What a wonderful way to start the day." Adam set the tray on the bedside table, bending to kiss his wife good morning. "Happy anniversary," he murmured against her lips. Vivian smiled up at him, her heart full. 5 years, she marveled. "It seems both forever and no time at all." "The best 5 years of my life," Adam replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. He ruffled Samuel's hair affectionately. "Though this little man has certainly made the last 4 more adventurous." Samuel beamed, clearly pleased with his role in their family. "Can we give Mama her present now?" he asked, bouncing with excitement. Adam laughed. "After breakfast, Sam, remember we talked about patience." "But it's so hard," the boy sighed dramatically, making both his parents laugh. They shared the breakfast: slightly burnt toast, eggs, and fresh strawberries from their garden, with Samuel chattering about his plans for the day. When the meal was finished, Adam produced a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a blue ribbon. "From both of us," he said as Vivian accepted it. Inside was a silver locket on a delicate chain. When opened, it revealed a tiny photograph of the 3 of them, taken in the photographer's studio that had opened in Bristol's Crossing the previous year. "It's beautiful," Vivian said, blinking back tears of happiness as Adam fastened it around her neck. "There's room for another picture on the other side," he said meaningfully, his hand resting briefly on her still flat stomach where their second child, a daughter, Vivian was certain had just begun to grow. The news of the pregnancy was still a secret between them, not yet shared even with Samuel. Vivian covered Adam's hand with her own, a wordless acknowledgement of the joy to come. Later, after Samuel had been entrusted to Mrs. Carson's care for a few hours, the widow, still a dear friend, and now honorary grandmother to their son, Adam and Vivian walked hand in hand through the town that had become their home. Bristol's Crossing had grown substantially in 5 years, new buildings and businesses springing up as the railroad had finally reached them the previous year. They stopped at the sheriff's office briefly, where Adam introduced Vivian to a newly arrived traveler, a reporter from a Denver newspaper, who was gathering information for a series of articles on the territorial governor's reforms. Mrs. Daniels was instrumental in one of the governor's earliest successes, Adam explained with pride. "The McGraw case." The reporter looked at Vivian with new interest. "Harlan McGraw, the man who went to prison for corruption and intimidation 3 years ago, that was quite a scandal at the time." Vivian nodded, still feeling a flicker of the old fear at McGraw's name, though the man was safely behind bars in the territorial prison. "Sometimes it takes just one person standing up to make others brave enough to do the same," she said. "I was fortunate to have support when I found my courage." Adam's arm slipped around her waist, a gesture of both protection and pride that had become second nature over their years together. "My wife is being modest." Her courage inspired many others to come forward. Without her willingness to speak out, McGraw might still be terrorizing half the territory. The reporter scribbled notes eagerly. "Would you be willing to tell me more about your experience, Mrs. Daniels? It would add a personal element to the story that I think readers would find compelling." Vivian hesitated, looking up at Adam. He squeezed her waist gently, leaving the decision entirely to her. After a moment's consideration, she nodded. "Yes," she said. "I think that would be good. Stories need to be told so that others might find hope in them." As they left the sheriff's office an hour later, having shared their story with the attentive reporter, Adam took Vivian's hand once more. "You continue to amaze me," he said softly. "Every day." Vivian smiled up at him, the afternoon sun highlighting the silver strands beginning to appear at his temples. "As you do me," she replied, "though I do wonder sometimes." "Wonder what?" Adam asked as they walked toward the river where they had spent so many evening strolls over the years. "If we would have found each other without the danger, without McGraw's men chasing me." Vivian's free hand rose to touch the locket at her throat. You had noticed me in town, but would you have approached me if not for that moment in the alley? Adam considered the question seriously, as he did all questions Vivian posed. I'd like to think so, he said finally. Though I admit I was a solitary man then, unused to speaking to anyone, let alone a beautiful woman. He smiled down at her. But I believe some souls are meant to find each other, regardless of the circumstances. We might have taken a different path, but I think we would have reached the same destination eventually. They had reached their favorite spot by the river, a bench beneath a cottonwood tree where they had sat countless times before. As they settled there, Vivian leaned her head against Adam's shoulder, content in the familiar comfort of his presence. I'm glad it was you, she said softly. Who found me that day, who showed me I was worth saving. Adam's arm tightened around her shoulders. And I'm grateful every day that you believed me when I said you were worth the world. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Because you are, Vivian. You and Samuel and this little one on the way, you're everything. As the river flowed peacefully before them, Vivian closed her eyes, savoring the moment. From a woman who once believed herself unworthy of love to a wife, mother, and respected member of her community, the journey had been long and at times difficult. But sitting here with Adam, their past reconciled and their future bright with promise, Vivian knew with absolute certainty that every step had been worth taking. I love you, she whispered, the words as true and meaningful now as they had been the first time she spoke them on Mrs. Carson's porch steps 5 years ago. And I love you, Adam replied, his voice carrying the depth of feeling that had only grown stronger with the passing years. Today, tomorrow, always. Together, they watched the sun begin its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Another day was ending, but their story, the story that had begun with a desperate flight and a cowboy's unexpected rescue, continued on, each chapter richer than the last. For Vivian and Adam Daniels, that was worth the world indeed.